today we're going to do Genesis 5, which is one of my favorite things to do. Just wish I was in better position to do it. The famous genealogy table that most people just, and I'm sure when they're reading, just glance over. I'm going to try to pick out a few things, from it that maybe you hadn't heard before. All right, last week we covered the murder of Abel and Cain and their punishment, as well as Cain's descendants and his family. They give up to, I believe, the 7th generation, and then we don't hear anything else about them. We noted in this long period of time, we only have just 2 chapters describing all these 1,000 years, so we just have so little to dissect to see what that world was like. Today we're going to look at a more extensive genealogy, listing the 10 generations from Adam to Noah and how old they were when they each had their son and when they died. So this was more specific. And like your Cain, it just listed who their son was. This it said he lived such and such years, had a son, and lived years after that. So this is how we can tell approximately the date of creation. So let's begin with Genesis 5. First 2 verses, descendants of Adam. This is really the last chapter of Genesis before we get to the flood story, so this is only the 5th and final one. This is the book of the generations of Adam in the day when God created man. He made him in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them man in the day when they were created. Just a brief recap of creation. Notice the specific language. It says that God created them in his image. We did not evolve from apes or any other animal. From the beginning of the creation of this world was made to live in, and this world was made for us. It was made for man. And here's everyone's first 10 ancestors. A few years back I did some research in genealogy, and the line, well, for most men, you're interested in your father's line. That's where you get your surname, and you go back and you go back. And my family was my grandfather was from Smith Island. He moved over here when my dad was a baby. And the Evans is probably the most common name on Smith Island. So I asked Jennings Evans, and he took me all the way back to, I think, late 1600s. A man named John Evans was the first settler of Smith Island. And then I got on Ancestry.com. Apparently someone in our family, or a distant relative, had done some more research, and he went back another 200 years. Evans is a Welsh name. Wales, that little country, are basically part of England or the United Kingdom. It basically means John. Evan is John in Welsh. And he went back to about 1450 was about as far as he could go, which was a long time ago. What's that? Almost 600 years ago. And most people probably, that's about as good as you're going to get. I remember one time I was on, just looked up Queen Elizabeth on Wikipedia, and I kept clicking her ancestors, and I clicked who were they the son of, and they went back all the way to like the 8th century. Over 1,000 years ago, but when when you're in royalty, you have more records and lineage and things like that. But there's only so far most of us can go back. But here's what every one of us know here: these 10 people mentioned between Adam and Noah, every single one of us came from them. Everyone on the planet came from one of their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, or Japheth. Most likely here, everyone here with European ancestry came from Japheth. But this is our family tree. These are the 10 men that lived a lifespan of up to possibly and over 2,000 years. And this is a little bit about each one of them. It's just a very brief biography, and that's all we hear from them again. And I mentioned before, since I was a teenager, I was always fascinated with this chapter, and it talks about that brief period of time when men lived so long. So I wanted to list each name here, and then also we'll go One by one. We'll write Adam first. This is how old he was when his son was born, and this is how long he lived after, and the total years lived. Alright, verse 3. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son, in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days after Adam, he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. A couple notes there, had other sons and daughters, so that's more than likely, or not more than likely, is where Cain and Abel got their wives from, or Cain and Seth. So Adam was 130. From the longer date, the one I talked about, the Septuagint, has him at 230. But whatever the case, he lived 800 more years. Look how long he lived, 930 years, almost 1,000 years. So who knows how much big the population of the earth was after that long period of time, but just think every single person on the planet could go back and trace their ancestor to their father Adam. Let's progress the line and see how long they live. Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh. Then Seth lived 807 years, and he became the father of Enosh, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. So let me check this again. 507. Seth, 105. Septuagint has 205. 807 more years, 912 years old. So still long lifespan, over 900 years. Just put this into perspective. Say if this was the year Adam died, 2021, it means he would have been born in the year 1091. Imagine how long that is. Imagine the history of our country, back to Jamestown, twice that long, and he still would be older than that. Just can't comprehend living that long. You know, maybe each of you here have foggy memories, you know, the early part of your life. For me, 50 years ago. For Brother Thorne, almost, and Jeanette, closing in on a century ago. Maybe there's just a little fog, and I just wonder when people like, you know, Adam or Cain or Methuselah, when they were almost 1,000 years ago, could their memory even recall something so back far as their childhood? But in the early days of creation, maybe just man was just made of better stuff, simply. It apparently had to be to live that long. So the next generation is Enosh. Enosh lived 90 years and became the father of Kenan. Then Enosh lived 815 years after he became the father of Kenan, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enosh were 905 years. So 90 and 815. For a total 905.
Coming down.
Yes, that's what I'm noticing. I want to point. So are the ages starting to reduce? And once again, my Septuagint, well, I have a different date. And I talk about that more in the other genealogy in Genesis 10 about these different dates here. All right, next we have generation 4. That's all we heard from Enosh. Again, one is listed once in 1 Chronicles when it listed numbers. Oops, back to week 1. Kenan lived 70 years and became the father of Mahalalel. Then Kenan lived 840 years and he became the father of Mahalalel, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Kenan were 910 years. Another 840, and once again my Septuagint list, 170. equals 910. So they had been going down for a direction, but now starting to go up again. So man seems to be as vibrant as ever. Now we come to the midpoint of the 10 generations. Mahalalel. And I'm just guessing how to pronounce these names. This is basically the way I've said them over the years. Mahalalel lived 65 years and became the father of Jared. Then Mahalalel had lived 830 years, and he became the father of Jared. After he became the father of Jared, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Mahalalel were 895, and he died. So here we have the first person who doesn't make it to 900. That's 65 and 830. Septuagint has it 165. I read a bunch of Noah novels, and you know, today in our world we say he does good for somebody in his 70s or in his 80s, and there's this line, there was an older man in this book, and they went to the market or something, and they said he does good for a man in his 800s. So that's kind of what they would say there. So even though Mahalalel didn't make it to 900, that's still a long lifespan, and with all these numbers here, the average age is over 900 so far. So next we got
children younger.
Yeah, that's the thing to notice. It's gradually going down the age that they are when they're having children. However, in my Septuagint, it adds 100 to each one. And then basically, you know, I said last week, you know, back in the 1800s and earlier, most people got married as early as possible because you didn't live that long. Here, you know, there was no rush because you had a long lifespan. Maybe you know, men then went out and established a living and you know, set up their own family business or something to you know, have enough to take care of a family. Then they would select a wife, and then for couple hundred years, you know, could have a large amount of children. So there's no rush here, but the age is shrinking, and in my, like I said, the Septuagint book, Septuagint, according to the dates, creation is 554, and the Masoretic, which all our Bibles are, is 4004, which is a difference of 1,550 years. All right, and this is where we pick up, this is where the 500 of those years we pick up here, 100 here, 100 here, 100 here, 100 here, 100 here. Now the next 5, both are the same. So we'll see, we'll check the numbers. And next in the line is Jared. So are the ages reducing? Then we read about Jared. Jared lived, so all the days of Mahalalel, his father, were 895. Jared lived 162 years and became the father of Enoch. Then Jared lived 800 years after that, after he became the father of Enoch, and had sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962. So it looked like the lifespans possibly were reducing. A couple points notice here. Like Jeanette had pointed out, it seems they were having their children younger, and then all of a sudden Jared goes up to 162. But look how long he lives, 962 years. At this point, he's the oldest person to live. He's less than 40 years from being 1,000 years old. So, you know, I've talked about this world before the flood. Said it looked different. It was probably just one big continent, probably tropical. There was just something different about the world then that made people live that long. I mean, it was the early days of man. Sin had not fully worked its way maybe through the genealogies and gradually reduced the lifespan, but it just had to be just a different atmosphere for people to have that ability to live that long, even after the curse and death had entered into the world. So it was just, you know, a place that's, you know, if we walked out today into it, it would be a place we wouldn't recognize. Really only 8 people lived in both worlds. Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and his 3 daughter-in-laws. They left in that old world, and then when they walked out of the ark, it was a totally, completely different place. You can imagine maybe we see on the news when a storm like devastates and wipes out an entire town. We won't get into the flood stuff now. Just imagine them walking out into the earth, and the whole planet has been devastated, unrecognizable. You know, all things starting out new. So we'll get into that when we talk about the flood. But anyway, so a sign of life increasing. Now, in these two chapters of Genesis 4 and 5, we have almost no story. I have 5 minimal stories, and here's one of the 5 here. And this is the one in the line that we're all familiar with. We'll read the passage of verse. Jared's son. So, okay, Enoch lived 65 years, and he became the father of Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So, if these numbers are right, Enoch is the youngest, has Methuselah at the young age of 65, lives another 300 years. We'll put an asterisk by that though, for a total of 365. So say this was today's terms, if all his family lived in their 90s, he only lived his 30s, but as we know, he didn't die. He was translated. Hebrews says by faith he was translated and did not see death. So the question arises, you know, will he just be one of 2 people who never die? Or will he come back as one of the 2 witnesses we talked about in our Revelation course that comes back? But anyway, this is just a brief story. Enoch apparently was a godly man, and what by now, for how many years had passed? Probably 2, 4, 6, 8, probably 1,000, 1,500 years into this world, a very wicked world, but he preached righteousness. We have a couple of references to him in the Bible. Well, I still have my... Of course, we have this passage here. We have the passage in Hebrews. It talks about him not dying. And then there's also a passage in the book of Jude. Let me have to find that real quick. Here we go. Jude verse 14. So Enoch may have been the first one who was looking ahead to the future when the world will end. Not only did he live before the flood, but he talked about the eventual return. Jude 14 says, it was about these men that Enoch, the 7th generation from Adam, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, prophesied saying, behold, the Lord came with many thousand of his holy ones, or I think the King James says was 10,000 of his saints. So perhaps Enoch was the first prophet or preacher or the first man called of God. So Enoch's lifespan is the shortest, but he did not die. So in one sense you could say he's over 5,000 years old, but he's been in heaven that time. And then we have his famous son, one we've all heard of, at least the name. I don't know if any of you knew that was son. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. So Methuselah lived 187 years and became the father of Lamech. So we all hear that when everyone says a joke or something, or says something about old age, we always compare it to good old Methuselah. I've heard he's older than Methuselah's billy goat or something like that. So I'm going to check these numbers again. And once again, Methuselah is older when he has children. 187, 782. He was 187. 969. So that's the magic number. I mean, just put it in perspective. You know, like when someone dies, like say maybe someone died 100, say so-and-so died, and they'll put on the screen 1920, 2020, or 2021 now. Today, if Methuselah died, you know, it would say Methuselah died, 2021, 1152, I think 20 or 10,052, 2021. Can't even comprehend living that long.
Looks like we could have squeezed out 31 more years.
I know. Well, we're going to get to the year he died. He possibly might have when we'll talk about the year. When we talk about the flood, because he died in the regular genealogy. He died the year of the flood. But then there's also the talk: was that the only thing the Lord was waiting for Methuselah to die? I've heard some say in Hebrew his name's something to the nature of when he dies it shall come. But now there's other people on the earth, they could have lived longer than him, but far as recorded people, Methuselah is the oldest person to live in all this line, even of his line of ancestors, which had long livers. Jared was the only one close, and other than that, no one was in, I guess, who's the oldest, Adam, within 40 years of him, other than his grandfather, Jared. And then we get to Lamech. Then we start to see a slight reduction. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now we have another brief story, one of the very few stories in the pre-flood world. Now he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed." Then Lamech lived 595 years, and he became the father of Noah, and he had other sons and daughters. So 182, 595. So again, similar age to most of his ancestors when they had children, except for Enoch. But 595. Now look at this total, 777. So, you live out 700 years today, that's good, but compared to his ancestors, a significantly lower amount of time. So, in one of my books about reading, it said, could this be an indicator that maybe Lamech had something wrong with him, that he didn't live as long as his ancestors, and it was passed on down through Noah's family, where all we came from, and as a result, gradually the lifespan began to increase. That's possible. Also just believe the environment of the world was not suitable for people to live longer. Also, in these days, people were vegetarians. Now, if you're a vegetarian today, you won't live to be 900. Even in today's world, you almost need protein. So now I know a vegetarian, most of them look healthy. They look thinner than me, but it also looks like a puff of wind would blow them over. So in today's world, you need meat. But in that day, they were not eating meat, or at least, you know, the godly people. I'm sure the wicked people were trying everything that was out there. So just look at these time spans. It's unbelievable. In this world that we know hardly anything about, we just know it was different. People lived longer. And just imagine this. Just think of the wicked men who've lived in the earth, like Hitler or Stalin, and they've really only got, you know, it takes years to get to that position, to get into their prime, and they've only got 10, 20 years, you know, to wreak havoc on the earth. Imagine people, you know, they could live for centuries. Suppose you had like a tyrant king, and he could reign for, you know, 200 or 300 years in his prime, and just the horrible things he could do as a result. It's just hard to imagine how wicked this world is. America and the world in 2021 is a horrible place, but look how many believers are. You know, we gather together today. All over the world, people will be coming together and worship. Just think, only 8 people in the entire planet. How terrible this world must have been. Or something else, as we'll get into other theories too. So that takes us to the final person, and we'll go into the last one in the line of Adam, the 10th, and Noah. So, as you know, I said before, everyone always says, well, we all come from Adam and Eve. Well, we also all come from Noah. because the world before him was wiped out. So let's look at this final verse of chapter 5. I'm surprised that the battery is almost dead. I'm surprised it made it through the lesson. We have the 10th and final person. All right, verse 32. Noah was 500 years old, and Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, first thing that jumps out here, even by these world standards, 500 is pretty late to have a child. So what are the thoughts? One of the suggestions was maybe Noah, the wickedness by his time, had just uncovered the whole world, and he basically said, I'm not even going to have children. It's so bad. Why populate the earth? It's getting increasingly worse, and then maybe the Lord, when he reveals his plan to him, decides to have them. That verse implies he had all three when he was 500, or that they were triplets, but you can see in other places the birth order. I think Japheth is the oldest, and Shem, and then Ham, all within a couple years of each other. And it doesn't list in this chapter that even though Noah lived as the only one in this line to see the world after the flood, he did live another 450 years for a total of 950. And after him, Shem was in his 600s, Shem's son was in his 400s, and it significantly goes down, which we'll see in another genealogy, I believe Genesis 10. So we can see the lifespan is the key thing. I wrote the average age here. If you throw out Enoch, because he really didn't die, I think the average age still over 900. Yes, the average age is 912 years. So a world we're not familiar with, unheard of in today's world. But let's set the stage now. Noah's 500 years old. Maybe he's watching the world wickedly get increasingly wicked around him. He's given up on even maybe having a family. And then all of a sudden the Lord makes himself known to him, which we'll get into next week. He has a plan to save the world. And then basically Noah is almost a second Adam part 2, because from him all the people of the earth will be descended from. So there's your genealogy. And I think, so from the Septuagint again, I won't get to complicate it, which is my preference. If the earth was created in 554 BC, this is a total of 2,156 years until the flood. And the Masoretic text be 500 years less, 1,656 years to the flood, from creation to the flood. So still a long period of time, up to over 2,000 years possibly. And all we have is 5 chapters. 2 on the creation, 1 on the fall, 1 on Cain and Abel and Cain's descendants, and 1 on this line of Seth's descendants. And then next week we go into the flood. We have a couple on the flood, and then we get to the call of Abraham. So that's all we know about this time period of our earliest part of the world. Just these few brief lines, and the key thing that sticks out from this chapter is long lifespans. So, anyone have any comments or questions about this chapter?
Does all the dates at least add up to before the flood?
Now, in our Bible, the one that the lower date, the Masoretic, if you calculate them, when Methuselah dies from his birth is exactly the year of the flood. In the Septuagint, he's a couple years after, so there's a problem there. Some explain it, but in the Bible you read, if say for Adam you wrote just 0, he was born and died 930, as you write it down, and then you figure out how old Noah was the year the flood was, it comes out exactly to the year Methuselah died.
Okay.
So, which would be which would be 1656
But
years.
you think it's the 1656 though?
I think it's this.
Oh, you think it's the
I think it's a
2156?
lot, yeah.
Okay.
I think it's the 55, 50. More the next 10 genealogies from Shem to Abraham is why, because just a lot of things happen in the world by the time of Abraham, and I just think if you go with the lower date, there's not enough time for the world to like repopulate.
Right.
So Kevin, the number on the lower left, I think it's 2186,
2156,
56. That was the end of that era.
yeah. So basically
Okay,
from,
now we're in 2021.
but this, I'm just going backwards here,
I know
so.
you are, but I'm just thinking about the Lord's return.
Oh, yeah. I definitely believe there's similarities, and as it was in the days of Noah.
Right.
This time last year, we just started a new decade. I never heard of, maybe a vague reference to COVID, this new disease coming up in China. And I'd really thought, I don't know if the Lord is coming in my lifetime. A year later, I've significantly changed my position. I believe we're in the last days.
Yeah.
And I believe this is a thing to set it in motion. Could be wrong, but that's how quickly things can change. So yeah, so about that same time period from Adam to the floods, about the time from when the Lord was here until he comes back again.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, stuff usually in your yearly Bible readings, you'll breeze through. Like in Chronicles, it just lists everybody's names. So we got so we got so. Even in the line of Jesus, but here it gives specifics, it gives age, numbers, it makes you point out these are real times, and it helps us point us to the creation date and the flood date, and then as we get the time of Abraham, we can start to trace history through archaeology and stuff like that and create a date. So.
And when was the flood during Noah's years?
How old was Noah?
Yeah.
600.
600.
Wow.
So that's key to getting the date.
600.
So it's 100 years after he has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So basically, his sons, all three of his sons, are around 100, which is in those days still before the flood is prime working years. So he's got three sons working on the boat with him, and that. I think in the floods, because when he's 601, he comes out of the flood. Then you start tracing stuff. You go to the genealogies, stuff like that. Any other questions? All right. Lord, we thank you for this time together. I ask that you bless us, help us to learn from your word, learn about the days of Noah that are wicked, and these same days are wicked today. Help us be a light to those around us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.